to honor our time. My name is Rudy Jung, and I'm the Director of Programs at MCAEL. Welcome to this session on data and what our data tells us about adult English language learning in Montgomery County. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce our MCAEL staff that are here with us. We have Tiffany Ross, who is our Manager for Network Learning and Development. We have Danny Keeley, who is our Technology Coordinator and Data Analyst, who will also be co-presenting today. Kay Savoy is also joining us. She is our Communications staff. And of course, Kathy Stevens, who is our Executive Director. So I'm going to unshare my screen just for a moment for Kathy to say a few words.
Oh, thanks, Rudy. Hi, everybody. I hope you're well I'm trying to get my screen bigger so I can see everybody. There we go. Hope everybody's well on this blustery day. I just blew in from the press conference that the county executive holds to announce the FY24 budget. And so there's good news for MCAEL. I haven't looked at all the numbers yet, but we did get an increase in our budget this year. And yay to everybody, because that will benefit everyone. And it ties in with today's presentation because the data that we collect, that many of you work so hard to collect from your learners, from your instructors, which then we can then collate and analyze and present in a larger fashion, is so important to support our requests for money from the county and honestly to other funders as well. So certainly keep up the good work with your data collection. We value it, and it comes back to really benefit the organization and the work we do, and benefits all of our learners and instructors too. And it struck me that one of the main points that was being made today about data was about compensation and making sure we retain great employees and all of that kind of stuff. So really important. So welcome, everybody. You have a great presentation. I just have to thank Rudy and Danny so much for putting this all together. And we're so glad to have Danny on staff now to really help us with these important things. The data is so important with what it tells us, where we can be doing things differently, how we're doing things well, and how we can help you and everyone in the provider world do better if there are things that we can help you improve on. So it's really important. So welcome. I hope that you get a lot out of today's presentation. Stay tuned. We have a lot happening too, particularly the spelling bee is coming up. So we look forward to seeing everybody on May the 3rd. And you'll be seeing invitations and e-blasts and all that good stuff around that, in addition to all of our wonderful programming, network meetings, trainings, all of the good stuff which you're already taking part in. So thanks, everybody. Danny and Rudy, I'll let you take it away. And I look forward to seeing everybody out and about in the community in the near future.
Thanks very much, Kathy. And just before we get started, I wanted to recognize a few other people. Anna DeNicolo is here. She is the new chair of our MCAEL advisory group. That's the group of program administrators and instructors that really helps inform our programming. So thank you very much, Anna, for your service. We also have a couple of board members with us, Stacy Parkinson, who is the chair of the board, and Joan Schaefer, I see, is here as well. I hope I'm not missing any other board members, but thank you very much for joining us today. So I'm going to share my screen again and get started. A little bit about our objectives. Today, we hope that you will come away from this meeting with a better understanding of several things. One is the general situation in terms of English proficiency in the county, and then looking at 2021 to 2022 data, where adult English programs most effectively met the need. Trends with regard, excuse me, I have this on a timer, I need to stop, I see. Trends with regard to enrollment, online versus in-person classes and class levels. We'll talk a little bit about where there are gaps in ESOL services, and we'll also talk a little bit about the state of ESOL programs and give a snapshot of those who teach ESOL. So we'll go first through some highlights of 2021 to 2022 adult ESOL data. by looking at some highlights from our interactive story map. We'll then look at a few points from mid-year data from this year, and then we'll look at some highlights of the recent instructor and program administrator surveys. I have to figure out how to stop this timer, sorry. Okay. So we're going to first start with showing you some maps to give you a context of Montgomery County and its residents. But first, I wanted to say a couple of words about the story map. Many of you may be familiar with this annual interactive data presentation already. We have done this for the last at least 5 years. We have partnered with County Stat for the first few years, and then more recently, we've been working with Montgomery Planning. But Montgomery Planning could not help us this year, so luckily we have Danny on staff who actually has recreated it internally. And it actually has greater functionality than before, so it's really wonderful. Our update is going to be ready next week sometime. We're still refining it, but I'm going to ask Danny to show you some of the maps that we have. Okay, Danny, so I'm gonna unshare my screen here. Sorry, just a moment. There we go.
Thank you, Rudy. So I'm going to share my screen now. So the story map starts with like a header here, and then the first maps we have here is just to give a background of where the people that need English are in the county. So all the maps here are interactable, so you can just scroll or hover your mouse. And you can see on this first one that we have 134, about we are going to change here, 134,000 adults in the Montgomery County. This year, 2021, was the last American Community Survey. So the good thing on these new maps here on the story maps, you can go back in time and see the different years, how the data changes. So for example, if you go back to 2017, you can see where, for example, this area here at the top was like lower than 12%, and now we have some spots here that it's darker. The darker the place, the more the need of English classes, because it's the limited English proficient of the people. So the next, and then you can just zoom in, zoom out, and see. And the important thing to say here as well, it's tracts. So with this information available from the American Community Survey, it's only by tracts. You can't see by zip codes. The next one will be the most language spoken at home. So the other thing that we had on the past story map, the past years, they were showing the most spoken language at home at all, like in general for all the people. And now here we filtered only for adults that speak English less than very well. So they have like English not as the main language, and the second language as well is the English is not as good as the main language. So if you see here, same thing here, you can go back to different years and see the different languages. And if you see the legend here, you change depending on the year, because it would show more languages or less languages. And the last map, yeah. You want to say something, Rudy?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I found it fascinating. I spent a long time on that map looking at the changes between 2017 and 21. So for instance, the blue are areas where Spanish is the most spoken language, but the parts that are blue decrease over time. So we're showing more language diversity as even the last 5 years.
Yes, this is so good. The last map we have here at the beginning, it's the learners that we serve. So comparing to the 2021 American Community Survey, so the first one that we saw at the beginning, topping with our learners, the classes that we taught last fiscal year, and here it's the same. The darkest, it's the most that we serve them, and here it's by zip code. This information. Did I miss something, Rudy?
No, I was just going to say that I forgot to mention that all of these maps, this presentation will be available on our website as of next week. And so when it is, we will send the link out to everybody, and you'll be able to explore this data at your leisure. Right. Danny, do you want to show how you can enlarge a map for people to look at?
That's something that I forgot. So all the maps here at the bottom will have these feature here that you can expand, and you have only the map on your screen. So you take out all the text, you have the map and the legend for each map. So this is important. Sometimes you can't see because the text, it's like the story map text, it's just over the map, so it's much easier. And if you click on the tableau, here is the name of the tool that we are using. You go to a new tab on your browser, and then you have only the map as well. And it's easier to see things, and you can even save only this map instead of the whole story map. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen again then. So that was the context. We, if some of you may know that the last time we looked at the number of people who said that they spoke English less than very well, it was 127,000. That was based on the 2019 5-year estimate, I believe, but now it's already up to 134,000. So our context is really, the number of people who need English classes is growing. I'm going to share my screen again and delve into a few other highlights that we have from our data. Looking at our data, we know that we ask for zip codes of our learners. And so we analyze where in the county these learners are from. So this is really useful in terms of our understanding how well we're covering, or programs are able to attract learners from different places equitably. And so the interesting thing about this 21 to 22 year is that we saw great increases in Up County. You'll see here it grew from 29 or so percent of all of the learners to 36%. And in real numbers, that actually meant an increase of about 800 people from Up County who accessed classes. But in the same chart, you can see that learners from East Montgomery increased, and that's really good, because this is traditionally an area where fewer learners have been accessing classes because there are fewer class sites in East County. But this increase from 7.5% to 10.5% actually represents about 300 people. So that's really great. And I hope that trend will continue. We think it's because of the increase of availability of online classes. So it doesn't matter where you live. You can enroll in classes that are offered by an organization in Bethesda or in wherever across the county. And that's really been a boon to some learners who have heretofore not been able to easily access classes. Unfortunately, we see a downswing for Mid-County and Silver Spring. And Right now, I don't have an explanation for that, but it's just, it is interesting to note. Let's see.
Rudy, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
What zip codes are considered Silver Spring versus Mid-County? I'm not sure if you have that information on hand.
We can follow up on that. Or Danny, do you know off the top of your head? Or maybe you can pop that in the chat if
Yeah.
it takes a moment to find it.
Yeah, on the map, when we have the map, you can see some of the zip codes and the city. In the one that we'll have a map further, I think even your presentation today, that we have the regions and then we have the zip codes inside the regions.
Okay, thanks. I'm realizing that I missed a slide here, so I will go back to it. It's learners served by language group. And you'll see that we have 5 years of data on this as well. And what's interesting about this is that, well, first, let me show you what it means. Okay, so this is a chart that shows the percentage of folks who speak, sorry, let me just take an example that will be easier. So if we're looking at Spanish speakers, 9.53, sorry, 9.53% of Spanish speakers who said they spoke Spanish English less than very well took classes. Should I repeat that? It's sometimes, every time I come to this, I need to tell myself again. So it was 9.53% of all Spanish speakers who self-reported that they speak English less than very well took classes. And so this is how we gauge access by different languages and language groups to classes. So it looks like, Spanish speakers kind of stayed around the same, level here. It looks like, other Indo-European languages, which include French and Russian and Hindi, kind of went down, and Asian and Pacific Island languages stayed like this. But I do want to say that there were two other trends that were going on at the same time that we have to keep in mind when we look at this data. One is what I mentioned before, that the total number of folks who are limited English proficient, as identified by the Census Bureau, those who reported they'd speak less than very well, increased. And during the pandemic years, there was a general decrease in number of folks who took language classes, English classes. So that's just a context we have to keep in mind. So especially on this, when you're looking at folks who speak other languages, other includes Amharic, Arabic, other African languages, as well as, I think, Hebrew. In 2018, 12.808% of those folks took classes, and it looks like it's really gone down, the numbers, but there was a very big increase actually. And in the interactive map that you'll see in the story map when you explore it, will show you, when you click on each of these bars, it gives you that information. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at these percentages. That may be more information that you need, but happy to answer any questions. Please put them in the chat. But I'm going to move on now to enrollment. So we're moving now to data that was collected by our grant partners in the fiscal year 2022. Thank you again to all of you for providing this information. The interesting thing to look at in this comparison between the last 5 years is that clearly the numbers went down during the pandemic, but for FY22, we're almost back up to where we were before the pandemic. So the numbers are increasing again. both in terms of the total enrollment reported, as well as the number of unique learners. And I'll explain this term total enrollment means that if you're looking across 1 year of classes, you may have the same learner attend in the fall and in the spring. And so total enrollment will count that person twice. It's just the number of people who were in classes, period. Whereas the number of unique learners, which are down here in this area here, are just as it says, that person would then be counted once. So moving on to just some demographic information that's interesting about learners in MCAEL funded programs. Almost 74% of learners were women. This continues a trend from, we saw a slight increase from over the pandemic years, actually, number of women attending class. There are probably a number of factors involved, but it may be that because there are more online classes available, women learners find it easier to attend. They perhaps don't need to then find childcare. There are many other explanations as well. And you'll see, just as in past years, the majority of learners served by adult ESOL programs are in the working ages between 18 and 64, I guess, with the majority between 25 and 44. And I always find it interesting to look at top countries of origin. You'll see here that the top 3 are in Central America: El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. I believe that this has been the case for the last several years. But you also see in the top 10 here, we also have China, Ethiopia, and Vietnam. MCAEL also started collecting language data of her primary language of learners. And not surprisingly, of course, Spanish is at the top with 67.7% of learners speaking Spanish. But then after Spanish is Chinese, Amharic, French, Vietnamese, then Portuguese, etc. So we see a bit there of the diversity of our learners. And something that is a very interesting slide to me is that, and I hope to you, is that in 2021, 2022, we still had a lot of online classes. In fact, in this chart, the blue is online classes. The red, sorry, is that right? No, the blue is in-person classes. The red are online classes. And then, so this chart shows those online versus in-person and the level. And so what this is bearing out is what people were talking about during the pandemic years, that we were afraid that learners at the beginning literacy and low beginning levels may be losing out or not attending class because they found it more difficult to engage in online classes. Well, in 21-22, you can see here that there are more learners in more classes at beginning literacy, more learners at beginning literacy and low beginning levels in-person classes. I'm sorry, we also wanted to say that, Danny, we also had a percentage of how many online versus in-person classes there were. Do you remember the percentage? It was something like 80%, 75% of classes were still online. So this is at the end of, this is in, spring 2022. So it was still, we were still coming out of the pandemic. That figure will be in the story map. It's not an issue. Okay. Any questions that I can stop to answer? I know this is a lot of information all at once.
Here's a question from Zeta. How does access to technology affect your numbers?
Well, we know for sure that a lot of learners, well, a number of learners do have technological barriers, whether not having a device to learn on or not having reliable internet. We know that they affect the numbers, but unfortunately, we can't really quantify it. But we are taking steps to address those barriers. Okay, so we were talking about 21, 22 data. That seems kind of a long time ago now. So we wanted to give you an update looking at mid-year data. And again, this is from reports from MCAEL grant partners. So you'll see that the FY23 targets, which is what we are seeing. Oh, let me start using my annotation here. So here are the targets here. So programs basically at the beginning of the grant year say that these are the number of learners that they hope to reach. So 9,200 students total enrollment with 5,500 unique learners, and they hope to have plan to have 782 classes. So at the mid-year, we had almost 4,500 total enrollment, 3,400 unique learners, and 351 classes. Just to note that this is still provisional data. I mean, we have to confirm some of these numbers still, but it gives you an idea that I think that programs are doing very well in terms of meeting their targets. The mid-year reports are always a little bit less than half because there are some organizations that have winter classes that have not yet been completed before the reports are due. So these reports were due in early January. So just to say that we're on track for making a great increase over the previous year on all fronts.
Rudy, we have a question in the chat that came in right before you switched to the slide.
Okay.
From Francesca. Are these statistics all based on in-person learning, online learning, or both?
So if we're talking about this slide, it's both. This one. So unless we distinguish, it's everything. It's both online and in person. This is the only slide we have in this presentation that actually divides it out. The other interesting thing to note for this year is that we already have an increase in in-person classes. So 38% of classes were in person this year and 63% online so far. And this is a breakdown of the levels. So we have actually a tie between low beginning and low intermediate in terms of the most number of classes, and then followed somewhat by high intermediate and high beginning. Okay, any other questions I can answer before we turn to our survey data?
A question from Alex Galen. Are these numbers based on students who attended classes or students who signed up for classes?
Students who attended classes. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on then to our surveys. We thought this would be a great opportunity to share some preliminary information from our program administrator and instructor surveys that we just implemented in February. So we, MCAEL, conducts these surveys every 2 or 3 years to make sure that we are understanding understanding the needs of program managers and instructors so that we can have the best possible programming. So our objectives, I've laid them out here, is to help prioritize topics and types of professional development offerings. And so these surveys that we just held will inform our programs for 2023 and 2024. We also like to have an updated understanding of who is teaching adult ESOL in the county, how well MCAEL resources are being drawn upon, and ideas for resources that we hadn't thought of providing. And then also more recently to gauge how programs and instructors view and are using ways to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in their work. In terms of the administrator survey results, the survey was open between February 6th and 23rd. We had 21 respondents from 12 community-based organizations, 7 faith-based organizations, and 2 social service organizations. And it's interesting that many of the respondents had been having classes for over 10 years, 13 of them. But we also had some who are newer and some at the mid, like 6 to 10 year point of offering classes. So one of the most interesting questions I thought was, we wanted to have a description of, see what people thought about their programs as they are now. And by class size, you'll see that 90% of programs felt that their class sizes were just right. And again, this was not based on online versus in-person, it's just classes in general. Also, for class demand, 40% or 8 programs felt that they had too much demand, which I assume that means that they were not able to accommodate all the learners that are coming to sign up for classes. So the demand is definitely there. For classroom space, 95% felt that their classroom space was just right. And that may be helped by the fact that most programs were continuing to have online classes as well. That helps maybe to relieve some of the classroom space issues. In terms of number of instructors, we have heard that some programs are having challenges in recruiting instructors or finding ones that fit their program. We have 7 out of the 20 programs that replied to this question who had too few instructors. And the other trend you can see here is that just over half of these programs felt that they didn't have enough support staff. This is another interesting question asked about in the next 3 years, what were programs thinking about? And so you can see here that a majority are planning to increase the number of learners that they're serving. And 35% plan to continue to serve the same number of learners, and none to decrease. There was another question that I'm not showing the responses to here, but there were a number of considerations that went into the responses to this question, including taking into account the number of instructors they had, the classroom space they had, the amount of funding, etc. So kind of mirroring this top section here, a bit over half of programs expected to increase the number of classes they offered, and the other 47% expected to continue to have the same number of classes. And then a few results from our instructor survey. So this one was open a little longer because we had some issues with our lists, but it was open between February the 6th and the 27th. And we had 73 people respond. Most from community-based and faith-based organizations, but also some from social service, social service organizations and community college. And the other here included teachers who were at for-profit or private schools. There was one work-based employee group. The Gilchrist Center, I suppose, is a kind of county government. So is a wide variety of representation here. Also, it's interesting to look at the length of time that instructors were teaching ESOL. The most actually here were between 1 and 3 years. So it's nice to see that relatively newer instructors, many of them responded to our survey. And you'll see that there's a split here, 14 and 14 between the 4 and 5 years and 6 to 10 years. But again, a spread of teaching experience. When we think about adult ESOL instructors, it's important to understand that it is really a diverse group in terms of not only number of years teaching, but also their status in terms of whether they are paid or volunteer, and also full-time versus part-time. So from this, these responses, you can see that it's interesting to note that the majority actually were either part-time paid here, so 36 or 37%, and then volunteer. And both of these are under 10 hours a week, work than less than 10 hours a week. And also, of course, the one that stands out here is that paid full-time, there are not very many positions that are paid full-time. We also wanted to know what instructors' plans were related to teaching over the next 2 years. I guess one of the things that stood out for me is that, you know, for different reasons, some instructors feel very strongly about or have a preferred mode of teaching, whether it is online or in person. So this is just to note that implementing programs is a little bit more complex these days and complicated, because program managers need to match the needs and preferences of instructors as well as learners. We were happy to see that not many wanted to transition to a different type of work or retire. So that's some good news. And we were also interested to see that what instructors do outside of teaching. So you'll see from this chart that they're actually the same for respondents to this survey. There were the same number of people who worked full-time with the people who were retired. So that I found very interesting. You had a lot of folks who also work part-time, but slightly less than people who work full-time. And I know your eyes are probably glazing over now from looking at all these tables, but I think we have one more that we thought was interesting. We asked, is English your first language? And we actually had 22% who said no, and 77% who said yes. And this was really interesting, I think, because at least for me, I didn't expect there to be as many non-native English speakers, but I think that's really great. Also, looking at this, how many languages do you speak? We have quite a few language talents here. We have 37% who are bilingual, and 13% who speak 3 languages, and we even have people who speak more than 3. So that was very interesting as well. So those were just some of the results that we chose to share with you that were interesting. There's a lot more data in there that we have yet to analyze. But we do know that this is going to be so helpful to our programming, and want to thank many of you who probably participated in these surveys. We really appreciate your feedback. So that's all of the presentation we had today. Are there any other questions or comments from any of you?
We have one in the chat from Megan. How many programs are represented in the instructor and program admin surveys?
So for the program admin survey, there were 21 program administrators who responded that represented 21 programs, because we asked that only one representative from each program respond. For instructors, those were in terms of the programs that were, I think we could look back and see here. Just a moment. It's impossible to tell, actually, because I'm sure that there is some overlap for organizations and programs that the instructors teach for. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? And please feel free to unmute if you'd like. Megan?
Yes, thank you. I think my question's wordy, so I wasn't quite sure how to put it.
Okay.
It was related to the learners served slide, and also just the data that you're showing about online classes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you noticing any sort of correlation to increased access to learners at that higher proficiency level as a result of online access? Because it looks to me like the data's going down on if I'm understanding that the learners served by language slide,
Mm-hmm.
The lower literacy the number seems to be dropping, but that may be because it's a proportion of total learners. And so what we may be seeing is an increase to access through online access to more proficient English speakers. Is that making any sense at all, what I'm trying to ask? Are you seeing any sort of correlation to, because of online learning, we're seeing more access to proficient?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, we had looked at this because we were curious. You know, we had talked about it in various coalition meetings and everything, and we actually have the data now that says there were more people at the higher levels of proficiency attending online classes. And Danny, you can add to that if you can remember any specifics, but.
Yeah, I'll share my screen here so I can show something on the. So you were talking about this one, right, Megan?
Yes, that one, but also combined with the sort of the data that's in that learners served by language slide that Rudy showed.
Yeah, I know which one you were saying. It's just taking some time to. So yeah, they are different ideas. It's not loading this one, right? So yeah, this one here, we see the total of learners, and it's different because here we have data from all our partners, and the one that is online or in person, it's only for the grants programs that we have. So we can really compare the data because they are different data. But here it's good because the interactive one, you can hover your mouse and you can see the number of learners. So the learners in this level is 700, and then if you see here, it's 400. It's attended in person and 200, almost 300 attended online. And you see that the higher the level, the more they prefer classes online because it's easier for them.
We also compared last year with this year, or sorry, the 2 previous years. And it's clear that, if you look at over the pandemic, from before the pandemic and then over the pandemic, you can see a trend.
Right. And I guess my question is more on the other slide, because when I saw it initially, I'll speak from our context. Both of the places where I've served have been primarily serving Spanish learners. And so I look at that and it looks like, does that mean that we're not meeting the needs of people in our community because that percentage is going down? But that's what I'm trying to say is if I'm understanding it correctly, it may not be that. It could be that we're still meeting a wide number of learners, but their proficiency is higher, like that would change our overall percent. Does that make sense? And maybe, I'm sorry if I digress. But I'm just trying to take that as an example.
Danny, sorry.
Yeah, would be a different analysis here, but I understand what you were saying. Like looking, because we need to filter the language and the method that the classes were delivered. But here you see as well, like this changing, because this is just a percentage. So at the end of this, our story map, you see some appendix, and you have one chart here that's similar, that one. And I think that the room that I am here, it's not, the internet is not as, yeah, it's just taking some time to load. So you see the same chart here, but then you see here that the number of adults with limited English increased, but the classes are as well increased. So the boxes are the number of learners that we served, and the line is the necessity of the English. So you see that the need for English like increased, but as well we kind of followed with our learners. Is that clear?
A few questions in the chat. There's 2 that I will make sure we get to. What Danny just said, is it that advanced students prefer more online courses, or that more advanced level classes are offered online rather than in person?
That's a good question, Rudy.
It could be either.
Yeah.
It could be either. We can't really, I think from the data, we can't really say for sure which of those it is.
And then the next question, what does the data suggest for MCAEL's program priorities over the next few years?
Thank you very much for that question, which is something I meant to speak to if I have not spoken to that. So it's a good reminder. Every year we use this data to identify the places where coverage is not as good in terms of adult ESOL classes. So this directly informs our grant priorities for the coming year. And like it has for many years previous, for instance, we know the geographic area of East County and now Upper Up County, meaning Germantown, there are fewer class sites, fewer in-person classes. And so those will remain, a focus for a grant program priorities. But we also are looking at that breakdown of access of learners by language group as well, and trying to figure out how best to serve groups that are not accessing classes now. And we, in the last couple of years, have been developing programs to directly address those gaps in access. One of the programs that is doing this is our community learning groups, which are introductory 9-week classes where we try to reduce as many barriers as possible, working with local community organizations and bringing classes to learners through those organizations. And so after that 9-week class is over, those learners are referred to existing classes in the county, but it's to help learners get on a pathway to learning. I guess in addition to that, of course, the survey data has a lot of implications for our professional development. And one thing that we are focusing a lot on is equity and access. And maybe Tiffany, do you want to say a few words about that?
Sure. So we use this as we continue to zero in on equity and access as a baseline to see, get a sense of where our coalition is in those areas, and what kind of tools or training people have been receiving in these areas. And we saw from the survey results that there's a strong interest in more learning around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that can be applied to the classroom. So that definitely affirms the path that MCAEL is on and will influence professional development. And we also asked in the survey what style of professional development people were interested in. So we might be able to bring a couple of different offerings that we haven't typically offered in the past. And then that some of the evergreen topics are still really important to everyone, like learner engagement, learner retention, speaking and pronunciation skills for learners. So it's influencing what kind of professional development topics we'll be prioritizing. And then we have another question from Judy. Any thought to partnering with employers to offer work-based ESL instruction?
Thanks for that question. Yes, we actually have been working with some employers, and in fact, our community learning groups model has worked well with for some employers. We've worked with Chick-fil-A in Silver Spring and done a couple of community learning groups for their employees. We've also worked with ESOL, which is a manager for some hotels in Gaithersburg and Germantown. For I believe it was mostly their housekeeping staff, but also, mostly housekeeping staff. And we've also worked with a landscaping company. So when we are approached by employers, this is an option to introduce if their learners are interested in general English. But over the years, we have been working with employers, yes. Okay, are there any other questions? We have about a minute. If not, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. I know that was a lot of information thrown at you all at once, but I hope that you did learn a little bit of something that you didn't know before. I think we'll have a recording of this meeting available if you want to revisit it, and look out for that link coming to you. I think we'll send it directly to everybody who signed on, who had registered for this meeting. We'll send it to you directly. So anyway, good to see everybody. Thank you very much for coming.